This show is sponsored by Den 10 Insurance Services, helping businesses get the right insurance for all their insurance needs. Visit den10.io to get a quote. DENTEN.io. And remember, when you buy an insurance policy from Den 10, you're giving back on a global scale. Hello, all my entrepreneurs and business leaders, and welcome to the Michael Esposito Show, where I interview titans of industry in order to inform, educate, and inspire you to be great. My guest today has known he wanted to be an entrepreneur since he was 12 years old. Starting multiple successful businesses, he now leads a team through critical thinking, transparency, and his vision for the future. At Canauri, his goal is to make cybersecurity straightforward and successful. That means faster time to detection and fewer false positives. Canauri gives businesses an advantage over their attackers. Please welcome CEO at Canauri, Greg Edwards. Excuse me.
Michael, thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for coming on the show. I was a little hung up on saying Canauri correct or wrong, and I think I said it wrong, and then I messed up your name, so I'm so sorry. Well, let's say that again. Greg Edwards is here with us live in studio.
You got it.
Awesome. So Greg, this is really, really cool. This is your, I think, third company from what I understand, if not third company, right? And you've had such a great experience in the entrepreneurial space of launching companies since the 90s, and even having the opportunity to exit a company that was a publicly traded company. So just an incredible experience that I know you're going to be sharing with our entrepreneurial community and our community of business leaders. But before we get into this amazing, successful career where we are today, you knew you wanted to be an entrepreneur at 12 years old. And that is incredible. So I'd love if you could share a little bit about that journey with us.
Yeah, so my dad, who was a mechanic in a small town in Iowa, owned his own business. It was a gas station and auto repair, so nothing glamorous, but he had a successful business. And I distinctly remember being in sixth grade, him calling me out of school, coming to pick me up, and we spent the day fishing together. And while he worked very hard. I mean, it was typical for him to work 12-hour days and work Saturdays and Sundays sometimes. But the fact that he had the flexibility to be able to do that, and I didn't appreciate as much as I do today, but I distinctly remember, the thing I remember was just being so cool that he called and got me out of school so we could go fishing together. And that to me, I mean, that sounds small, but that was the trigger for me that I still remember today of I wanted that flexibility in my life to be able to do the things that I wanted to do when I wanted to do them.
Yeah, that flexibility in entrepreneurship and business ownership is very interesting because it's actually tricky. It's very tricky, right? I mean,
as I've learned once I actually became an entrepreneur and had I think the longest that I worked nonstop was 38 hours. This was back when I was in my 20s. But almost 2 days straight without sleeping in there.
Wow.
And so, yeah, you have the flexibility to be able to go do things, but you also, and I don't work like that anymore, and I just couldn't, but you have to be willing to.
What happened that you were working for 38 hours straight? Was that a recovery program or something?
No, actually we did. So my first company was a network engineering, network consulting business, specifically for insurance agencies. And we did these zero downtime upgrades where we would come in, replace their server. This is old technology, but we'd replace their server, and by 8 a.m. the next morning, we'd have them up and running like nothing ever happened. And back in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, that generally was a 2 or 3 day ordeal where they'd be down and have to. So this was a particular event with an agency that we did that with, and had multiple projects going on, and I was very involved in the actual doing of the technology
Mm.
at the time, and so managing that project and other projects that we had ongoing and making sure everything went smoothly. That was 38 hours of continuous work.
And that's some dedication. But you said willing, and I'm kind of like hanging on that one there, because you said you have to be willing to do it. And, obviously 38 hours, you're going without sleep. I can't imagine that you're eating too healthy during those 38 hours either. So it's not like you're getting the nutrition that you need, like an ultra marathon runner might be getting while they're doing their ultra. I'm interested in what that means to you to be willing, because, again, we have this beautiful community that listens to this show, and they're community leaders, they're business leaders trying to climb the ladder, and they're successful or just budding entrepreneurs. And I think that the desire that you're talking about in the word willing is so important for us to kind of like unravel.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, looking back in my mid 20s, when I started the first company, it wasn't even necessarily that I was consciously willing, it's just what I did.
Mm.
And I think you have to have that drive and that that desire to want to succeed enough that it's not necessarily even a willingness, but it's just what you do.
Mm. So it's like tied into your identity.
Absolutely. And I mean, I do want to say I've found some balance in my life since then, and have a family, and have learned to bring some balance. So I'm not suggesting everyone go work 100 hours a week, or 38 hours straight for sure. But back to that, having the desire to have a successful business, and again, back to the being willing to do it. I don't necessarily know that I was consciously thinking, oh, I'm okay and I'll go work 38 hours. It was more, well, that's what we have to do this week.
Yeah, and I think what you just said there, what we have to do this week is the integrity of saying to this company, we're going to get this done for you, and actually delivering on that promise. And I think that that's what leads to the successes that we're going to talk about later, is that integrity that you have of standing by what you're saying you're going to do. And again, goes into that willingness, is like you're willing to do the hard things. And I think when we talk about this stuff on the show, it's that is it really. It's, that's entrepreneurship. That's climbing the ladder, is that you're willing to do the hard things that others might not be willing to do, that might say, you know what, I'm going to take a break now.
Right. Right. And being committed to doing that over and over and over. And again, not necessarily the 38 hours straight, because I don't recommend that, but no. that staying committed is also a huge component of that.
I'm inspired by that story. I got a couple things I need to get done in the next 38 hours. I want to go back to your dad, and I believe your uncle, right, who owned this gas station mechanic shop. Did you ever like toil in there and work in there to where you started? Yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I don't remember. Don't want to get my dad in trouble for violating any labor laws, of course. But probably around that age of 12, 14, I was there every Saturday, sweeping the floor, and started changing tires and changing oil when I was probably in that 14 to 16 range, and worked all through high school there on, after school and on the weekends. Yeah.
It's interesting. I had another guest on not too long ago, and we kind of had a very similar experience, and that you're also sharing too, in that, our fathers, and even for anybody out there, our parents, our mothers or whatever, but in terms of this conversation, were kind of, my father just had an entrepreneurial bug, and he was a physician's assistant, still is till this day, but he used to make product on the side, hair and skincare product, and I would help with that. But going back to your story here, in that just sweeping the floors and everything, I think that kind of like, at least for me, kind of awakened this bug. So I know that you said had to do with the fishing trip and the flexibility, but speak a little bit about the impact of being there and working. And I mean, because there's a decision that's made, right? You could decide, you can be sweeping the floors going, I never want to be subject to owning my own business and having to do this, versus I actually really enjoy this work and see the work he's doing.
Yeah, and the interactions with the customers, I think was definitely impactful
Mm.
to me. And seeing him managing the employees, and they all had, it was a small knit group, and they had very close bonds. And so seeing all of that really is what made me want to be an entrepreneur. And I think it was in my blood.
Mm.
Um, and I don't remember the exact age, but the 14 to 16 range, I also started recruiting my friends to to detail cars. And so I would talk to the customers and say, hey, we had a car wash there. But then we would actually detail the cars and charge them $50. And this is back in the would have been the late 80s, mid to late 80s. And so I was recruiting my friends to to do the work, and I would I'd be the salesman and get the business.
That's so cool. It's funny. There's these little things in our lives that really lead us to where we are today in terms of anywhere that we are, but at least in terms of the entrepreneurial journey. I remember for us in the Northeast here, with the snow coming down, I would be walking up and down my block with a shovel on my shoulder, looking for a driveway to shovel for $5 or $10.
It-
Go ahead.
yeah, isn't it crazy how, looking back, that those are the kinds of things that we we as kids, I mean, I don't know that you teach that,
Mm.
going and taking responsibility for your own finances,
Hmm.
even at 14, is, that's just an interesting dynamic that I think a lot of entrepreneurs do have.
Yeah, it's yeah, and I didn't know that because I went down the corporate road first. So I didn't really know. I just went through, all right, I'm going to go to graduate college, I'm going to get a job. And I didn't know until I became an entrepreneur, and my coach and I were talking about like my experiences. And I started, and she's like, yeah, you're an entrepreneur. And it was hard for me to accept that word, to be quite honest. So I'm actually interested in the word for you. But it was very hard for me to accept saying that I'm an entrepreneur. I didn't feel.
Yeah, so for me, I don't want this to sound conceited, but
No.
um, it was, I think, it may have not known the word entrepreneur at 12, but I knew that I would be an entrepreneur, whether
Mm.
I knew what the word was or not. I knew that I would own my own business,
Yeah.
at least from that 12 or 14 age.
And so when you were that young, knowing this, what was the business? I know that you are obviously into computers and IT today, so I could only imagine, what Apple was like when it first came out in your time.
So yeah, so it actually wasn't technology, and I didn't know. So I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, or what that business would be. I actually thought I wanted to be a chiropractor, because we had a successful chiropractor in our town, and great guy, and looked like he had a good life. So I thought, oh, that's what I'll do, and that'll be an easy way to be an entrepreneur. Um, didn't take me very long. That's not what I wanted to do, but I did have a background, again, with my dad's business. He and my mom actually bought an Apple IIe computer this would have been when I was maybe 11, and I latched onto that technology, and I was writing code. I was actually a student liaison for one of the very first computer labs put into the state of Iowa, and helped the teachers to understand the technology, and taught them. And so that's where, and then was a computer geek all through high school, and then when I actually needed to get a job, go and dropped out of college and applied at a software company when I was 19 or 20. I don't even remember for sure. Um, and got hired on with a software company just based on my experience with computer systems back, again, this would have been in 90, 93, 94
Mm.
time frame. So yeah, so really, really then once I started working in the software industry, then that's when I knew technology is where my career would be.
That's really cool. It's funny. I had a different experience with an apple. I remember my mother brought home the first Macintosh. So that was during I was around the same age as you were at the time when Macintosh came out. And I remember she brought that home and I looked at it and she's like, yeah, this is the new thing. And everything. She was really excited about it. She was in education. And I was like, I don't want to do anything with that. Like I have no interest in that. What's cool about your story there too is like that was before being a computer geek was actually cool. Like now
Oh, definitely.
now if you play video games and you write code, man, you are like the star football player. Uh,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely not back then.
yeah. So what did you do to compensate for your geeking out on code back then? What was your
Well,
go-to?
yeah. I mean, so grew up in a tiny little town in Iowa. So I had a high school graduating class of 38 people. So it wasn't. We really didn't have the dynamics that you do in a larger school system. I mean, everybody was friends with everybody, and so it wasn't that, and it wasn't even. I mean, there weren't computer geeks back then. So it wasn't like that was even a thing that I could be, even though I was,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So it was, I felt like I fit in with everybody and play. I mean, I'm not athletic at all, but
But
was
yeah,
able to wrestle and play football and, um, again, was not good by any means, but I mean, there were 14 boys in my class out of the 38. So like just to put together a football team,
you're Yeah, you end up getting it's similar to where we live here in Highland. We see the boys and the girls getting pulled for each sport because there's not enough to go around. So they become these multifaceted athletes, which I think is really good for them.
I do too. I mean, I think because now in the larger school systems and larger cities, it's very specialized. You got to
Yes.
pick a sport when you're 10, and that's what you do.
That's it. Yeah, yeah. That was my experience growing up in the city in Queens. So you kind of skimmed over a few things that I think are also kind of crucial to your journey. In that you mentioned dropping out of college, and I kind of know a little bit of the background there, but I'd love for you to share a little bit about this experience where you obviously are a smart guy, a smart kid at the time, and I could only make assumptions here that you're probably doing well in school, and then you have to make a choice to drop out of college. Could you share a little bit about that experience and overcoming? I think that this speaks to overcoming challenges.
Yeah, yeah. So at 19, I found out that my girlfriend at the time mysteriously became pregnant. And so
How could that happen?
how could that happen? And there was no way that I wouldn't be involved in I didn't know at the time, but soon to be son's life. And so I dropped out of college, actually got a job before the software gig, got a job working in a factory, worked third shift in a factory, and then moved back to my hometown where my dad had the gas station. So worked third shift in a factory, got off at 7 a.m. and rather than going to the bars, which is what most of my coworkers did because 7 a.m. the bars were open to take care of them. I would go change my clothes and go to the shop and work for my dad. And I did that. I only did that for about 9 months, but it really gave me a definite understanding of hard work and the value of money.
Mm,
I I think I think in the factory I made maybe $7.35 an hour or something like that. So
mm.
So that experience and working third shift, I mean, I knew at that, I mean, I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I wasn't sure, how this was going to work. I thought at that time I was thinking, okay, maybe I take over my dad's shop, but I really didn't want to be a mechanic and didn't want to stay in that small town called Traer, which is a beautiful little town, but I wanted to get out. And so yeah, so that was certainly a life-changing event and has been amazing. I mean, that my son, I helped to I didn't end up getting married, but very involved in my son's life all through. We had shared custody all through his grade school and high school years, and so it turned out very well. And it was for me a great change and a great growing up experience at 19.
Yeah, I mean, you're so young. So first of all, I just want to commend you on making that decision to be a part of his life. I mean, it's a lot easier for the guy to disappear. So definitely want to commend you there. We speak so much these days about work-life balance and about creating harmony between our families and our businesses. And so I'm interested in what that looked like for you at 19, because again, I go back to so many challenges, right? So I'm 41 now, and I see that as a challenge, right? And I'm married, and we had children together, my wife and I, and experiencing that was challenging. So being 19 and, like you said, not going to the bar and working double shifts, like between the manufacturing firm and your dad's shop. What did work-life balance look like, and how did you maybe find that harmony?
Well, so back then it didn't exist. I mean,
Right.
it was just work, sleep, eat. That was pretty much it, and that was just survival mode. And I
Mm.
think that anyone in that, and it's difficult in any situation to have balance when you have kids, you have a full-time job, and I think that people need to give themselves some space and
Mm.
because you're gonna be overwhelmed, and you've got to see that as a temporary part of your life to get through. I mean, and spend time with your family, but know that you can't do all of those things and do everything perfectly. So, give yourself some space there. Um, but then as I matured, then having that work-life balance, and I would say I didn't really figure that out until my mid 30s, maybe.
When you started
Um,
getting tired, you mean?
Yeah, I actually semi-retired when I was 38 and I had two successful businesses running, but had business managers that were taking care of them. And that was when my son was in high school then at that point. And I worked about 10 hours a week for 4 years and spent time with my son, got my pilot's license, did some really, really fun things through those years. But then I got bored. So I went from one extreme to the other.
That's wild. I love some of the things that you said. Well, I love everything that you said, but some of the things I want to highlight here is the first one is giving yourself space. I think that that's like so crucial, and I say give yourself some grace, right? And I think kind of meaning the same thing in terms of like just being forgiving, and then that you can't do everything perfect. I love that too. I know we're going to be talking about your philosophy on just getting started on things, so we'll talk about that in a second. But that has to do with just not always being perfect. And then the other thing that I love is you were saying something around the lines of like just realizing your situation and just knowing that it's temporary. My coach and I brought up Merit before. When we're working through some hard things together, she says that to me. She goes, "But Michael, just realize this is temporary. This is just for now. It doesn't mean it's forever. It's just temporary." So I really do love that. You did start some successful businesses, and I know I really want to kind of like dive into some of those things, but I am a little excited, or you kind of like hit a little fun spot for me in terms of the piloting license. So since you took that little 4-year break, why don't we just take a little break from business for a second and share a little bit about this experience as getting a pilot license? And I see you have the sailboats and the boats behind you. So obviously like a pretty cool extreme sport kind of guy. I'm interested in this.
Yeah, so getting my pilot's license was something that I always wanted to do, and I had a actually one of my clients, their husband owned a business that they built airplanes. And so when I saw a picture of this woman's husband with an airplane, and I said, "Oh, what is, what's tell me about that?" And she made an introduction. He built these kind of airplanes called a Lancer, which I knew a little bit about and was the kind of airplane that I knew that I wanted. And so she made an introduction. I spent some time in his shop where he built these experimental home built airplanes, and and I started working on my pilot's license with a certified instructor and a certified airplane, and worked through that in the early 2000s. I was actually flying on 9/11. We were in the air practicing uh, uh, radio out, so no communication while you're in the air. What do you do? And so we were flying, and again in Iowa, we were flying north of Cedar Rapids Airport, and we're out there for about an hour with our radios off. And as we came back into Cedar Rapids, which is a pretty small airport, regional airport, there were all of these commercial jets lined up on the taxiways, which just doesn't. I mean, typically, there's a few flights per hour, not lots and lots of flights like you see in the large airports. And landed, the tower was just odd in their communications with us. They were very sparse in their communication, where usually they're very talkative.
Mm.
We land, taxi in, and there's all of these private jets and all of these people in the FBO, which is a fixed base operator, which is where we go out of, and walked in, and the first tower fell at about that time, and so that was a very surreal event. But that, and I'm going down a rabbit hole with that
No.
story, but I mean that's something that will stick with me forever. And so we didn't get the announcement while we had the radios off that every flight in the country was grounded.
Mm.
And that's why all of these jets were at our airport, but we had no idea of that, and no idea until we parked the plane and walked in and found out what was happening.
Mm.
So
I'm sure that while you were in the air, though, and you saw these planes there, that you started probably thinking about there could be something going on.
well, we were far enough. We were 60 miles or so north of the airport at the time when
Mm.
so we didn't see any of the jets coming into
Oh,
land.
okay.
No idea of what was going on.
Oh, okay.
And until we were coming in on final, and about, at about 2 to 3 miles out from the airport, as you're still descending and coming into land, that's when we saw all
Gotcha.
of this activity. And then we're like, wow, something's going on.
Right.
But the tower wasn't communicating with us other than cleared us to land and taxied us to where we needed to go.
Mm. Wow. That's an incredible story there.
Uh,
I-
so so to continue on then with getting my
Sure.
pilot's license, this friend that owned the Lancer building business called me and said, "I have an interesting project that you might want to be involved in." He had a Lancer, was this a Lancer 360 that he was building for a customer, and the customer actually couldn't get his medical license, so couldn't get his actual pilot's license, and wasn't going to be able to fly the plane. And so now he's got this plane that's mostly finished, still needed to be painted, needed avionics, and needed interior, But the builder and my friend didn't have the cash to finish it out and said, "Do you want to go into partnership with me? I'll do all the work. You just pay for all, everything that we need and can be half owner of this." This is before I even had my license. And this is a retractable gear, high performance airplane that you don't, I mean, it's not your first airplane kind of plane.
Gotcha.
And I said, "Yep, let's do it." And so bought in, or at least became partners in this plane before I even had finished my license.
So
Yeah.
do you still own the plane?
And I still own the plane today.
So this
Yep.
is a high perform. It's like speaks so much to your entrepreneurial journey, though, right? Where it's like quick decision making, no regrets, and just going for the best of the best, or the most high performance out there, which is pretty cool.
And this plane is a blast to fly. It's a single engine plane. It's only 180 horsepower, but it goes about 220 miles an hour.
Wow.
And so for a small plane, that's really fast.
Right, pretty significant. And so you got your pilot's license, so you're piloting, and then the other thing I see is the boats behind you and some really cool pictures.
Yeah, so that's something I haven't taken on yet, but want to get would love to own a sailboat. Love the Caribbean, and would want to be able to spend more time there, but something I haven't done yet.
Oh man, I got to hook you up with my dad. He's a big time sailor, and he and several other family members and friends, sailing friends, of course. They book a trip down to the Caribbean, and they go around, they bounce around to all the different islands, and he's been begging me to come on that trip with him, and it's always a challenge for me, but it's an amazing trip, and I'm assuming that you might even have maybe looked into something like that, or have done something like that already.
I have, and I've done some of that, but
You want the boat.
I want to be the captain.
And you know what? It's so funny because he does talk about that. I'm like, "What's the difference?" He's like, "There's a big difference, Michael."
Huge difference.
That's awesome. So we're going to get back to the businesses, and you know what I think too, in what you just said there, and for everybody to really capture here, is that while we talked about work-life balance and harmony, and I know that it's not so like time blocked. It's not like this minute I'm going to work on the business, this minute I'm going to go and have fun. But I believe that's why we use the term harmony in this conversation, is that there is this harmony that happens of like really grinding, really working, and then also kind of being able to build something to where you want it to be, to take the time off to be able to have fun and enjoy your children and enjoy life, because that's like why we work. So I want to get back to you now in terms of you starting your very first business in 1998, what that journey was like and how it started leading to the other opportunities that you have in front of you today.
Yeah, so back in 1998, and this was good timing and luck to and taking the opportunity. But back in 1998, everyone was having to replace their computer systems because of Y2K. And so there just weren't enough technical people out there to get all of this done before the end of the century. And so I had background with insurance software and with hardware, and I essentially went door to door to these insurance agencies and said, "Hey, I'm an expert in this specific software, which is a company called Applied Systems. I can do these upgrades of your server, do them with zero downtime, and bring your system back up so that you walk in the door with your staff at 8 a.m., you'll be up and running." And in 1998 and 1999, that was like the easiest sale it that could ever happen. And I didn't realize that at the time, and I didn't consider myself a great salesman, nor do I today. But it was such a great product, and the 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 ability to do that for companies was a no-brainer for them.
Mm.
And again, I'm the thing is though, I'm 24 years old at that point. And the fact that they trusted me to do that is a little amazing in retrospect. So I must have been an okay salesman at the time, but that's how it started. And it really was, I think, in retrospect, because of Y2K, made that made that an easy transition.
What was I remember that that Y2K fear of everything happening, and I kind of remember why it had to do with like the dials of the zeros, everything going to zero. But what was the reality of this? Um,
So the reality was on January 1st, 2000, I had a flight to Mexico booked to go on vacation. That's how confident I was that nothing was going to happen. And it really did. I mean, these systems had to be upgraded because there were systems that would fail. But I had tested all of our clients' systems, knew that everything was going to be fine, and it really turned out to be a non-event. Um, but there was fear that every computer in the world was going to stop working, and I knew that that wasn't going to be the case, but systems certainly had to be upgraded.
that's interesting. So you kind of like I think it goes back to seeing what the need is and adapting your product to filling that need, right?
Right. Yeah. And that's again going back to that sales. I'm sure that I had that confidence when I went in to say, and everyone else's, the sky is falling, and I'm like, no, here's what we need to do, and told them exactly what they needed to do and did it, and everything worked.
Yeah, I heard you talk about that boardroom confidence that you had at the time, and I'm interested in that 24-year-old. What led to that confidence? Because I know there's more to it than just, I believe, just this kind of like ignorance of who you're speaking to, but more of this inner confidence that of the knowledge that you had at 24 years old. So I'm interested in that. If you could share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so one of my first clients, and this wasn't an insurance agency, but actually was a financial services firm, and I distinctly they were split off from a multinational multi-billion dollar company, and a really great client of mine early on. And I can remember sitting in the boardroom with these 50 and 60-year-old people and going over what their budgets were going to be for the coming years, and not even I wouldn't necessarily say that it was a confidence. It certainly was a confidence thing. Back then may have been somewhat of an arrogance thing, but it was because I knew the technology, I knew what they needed to do, and was able to present and lay that out. And for whatever reason, and I can't explain it, um, had no fear to go and speak to who, now looking at a 24-year-old and thinking my 24-year-old self, like you should have been very scared going into those meetings, and it never was.
It's fun. It's the you don't know what you don't know, right? I
It-
think.
right. I think that there's that certainly that because I didn't know that I shouldn't be doing that, or and I absolutely should have been because I could do it, but there was no one telling me you can't do this. So that that was and I had some great mentors too that were telling me you can do anything,
Mm.
and you just have to go do it.
Tell us a little bit more about those mentors. So, who are some of those people?
So definitely my dad, and had an uncle that was very instrumental in that early development. That also owned his own. He owned an accounting firm, and he was very instrumental in that, giving me the confidence to go do anything that I set my mind to.
I mean, it's so important, like, to have those people in our lives, and if you don't have one in your life, go seek one. Go listen to a book, a podcast, something to be able to hear that you can do anything. I know I just listened to Adam Sandler's speech. He was just inducted in the Mark Twain, some sort of great accomplishment. I can't remember exactly what it is, but it has to do with Mark Twain. And in his speech, he spoke about that, about his dad and his mom. He was fortunate enough to have parents who supported him in this way of saying to him, you can do anything. And he says that they essentially brainwashed him to believe he could do anything. And then he said he married his wife, and he was like, and again, another woman in his life who came in and said, you can do anything. And so he scaled up and started doing more, and then forming the friends around him from SNL saying, you can do anything.
Yeah. And that's the kind of experience that I had with my parents and with my wife now, that it was very much that you can go do anything. I didn't appreciate that until probably into my mid 30s, that I didn't even realize that other people didn't have that. Like, I just thought like why aren't more people doing this, and why aren't and I'm like, okay, maybe their circumstances weren't the same as mine, and certainly wasn't. I didn't have a silver spoon. With my dad and my parents weren't wealthy, but that wealth of ability that they gave me, that I again didn't appreciate until I realized how valuable that was.
Yeah, no, not everybody has it, and that's why, again, I encourage everybody listening to pick up a book, to pick up an audio, to go watch some YouTube videos, to start surrounding yourself with people who do have that mindset. Because I mean, that's like what got me to where I am. I think my parents always encouraged me and always believed in me, but when I went through my hardest times, it had to do with picking up Tony Robbins cassettes and tapes and starting to read and listen to and actually put in some work about self-development. So it really helped me in believing in myself and that inner confidence.
It's funny that you mentioned Tony Robbins. One of my experiences with my uncle was that he took me to LA, and this is I think I was 20 at that time. So this is during that time frame of, I think I had quit from working in the factory. I don't remember exactly what I was doing for work at that point, but he took me to LA to a Tony Robbins event.
Wow.
And here I am, no experience with Tony Robbins. And he had been a Tony Robbins fan at that point, and I'm in this room with a bunch of 50-year-olds thinking how old, all these old people, and they're standing on their chairs clapping and yelling, and it was just that excitement that I'm like, wow, like if he can motivate all these old people, there's got to be something to this.
Yeah.
So that, and one of the first business books, or not even necessarily business book, that my uncle recommended to me that I read at around that age was Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich.
Yeah.
Which is iconic.
Yeah, Think and Grow Rich is certainly one that we talk a lot about on the podcast. And it's kind of what inspired this podcast itself, in that for me, learning about Napoleon Hill's story and the journey through Think and Grow Rich, of going and interviewing all of these titans of industry, which is where the title comes, where my intro comes from to some extent, was that's what I wanted to do in order to learn from people like yourself. So thank you for adding to Napoleon Hill's book there in the podcast. As we progress in your journey here, so 98, you start this firm, you have this wonderful inner confidence, and you're building it out. You have this expertise on exiting companies, which I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit more about as we progress here. But again, you have this expertise on exiting companies. So you did so with that company and started the new one, or kept it?
Actually still kept that, and that I still own that business today.
Okay.
I unfortunately, or fortunately, not sure which, but sort of ignored it for years and years while I was growing an offsite backup and disaster recovery company, and then as I've been building the cybersecurity company, but have actually started growing that network management and what's called a managed services practice again. And the technology, I really got burnt out in that business, and the properly managing a network back in the early 2000s was so much work and so hands-on. And now the technology and the cybersecurity is in place to make that, I don't want to say it's super easy, but to make it manageable and scalable now.
Yeah. Speak about, and I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, it's starting these other two SaaS companies throughout of that managed services business is how I've done that.
Right.
And exited from the offsite backup company.
From the other one. And speak a little bit about that ignoring of the business, because you said you don't know if it's good or bad, but obviously it worked out well. And I think that had to do with delegation. You said you have some managers, you have high-level managers running the operations. And so there's a lot of delegation that has to come in. There's a lot of self-discipline too on your end to not step in, right? Even if you were a little burnt out and didn't want to step in, but there was still...
Yeah. So that... Actually, when I started what's called Access Backup, and that's the offsite backup company that I sold to a publicly traded company called J2 Global, that when I started that company, I started it with the intent of hiring a business manager, implementing the technology, and stepping away, and started it with that intent. And that was difficult and rewarding all at the same time, because it was this sounds ridiculous, but it was hard to not go to the office and hard to set the boundaries. And what I did is set so that the business manager that was running it, we met once a week, and he would only bring, unless something was absolutely on fire, we would meet once a week and deal with any issues or decisions that needed to be made. And that was very difficult, from being a hands-on, doing everything, to making that transition. But it is one of the things that made that company very successful.
Where did you learn to do something like that?
So I went through a coaching program, and it was called the Strategic Coach. And I went through that system, and that's really what changed that mindset. So I had also read the E-Myth, and
Michael
I'm forgetting Michael Gerber. Yep. And so that was an influence, and then Strategic Coach is really what helped me to implement that. Yeah,
Michael Gerber's book. And there's so many others, Traction, and such great ones that speak about this and this way of delegating.
Right, because I was the ultimate E-myther, and it's the entrepreneurial myth where you think, oh, you have something that you're good at, that you love, that's what you should go do as a career. And it turns out that you end up hating that thing because it's the only thing you do. And that was my life in the early 2000s, and got to the point where I started to hate technology, and I love technology.
Right.
And so had to step back. And the E-Myth was critical in that thinking process.
That's incredible. It's funny. It relates to something that I'm experiencing right now in my life. We spoke earlier about the two companies that I have, which is Downtime Insurance, and then Michael Esposito Inc., which is what brings us on the podcast here. And I was actually just talking about this with my coach Merritt about the program that I just launched, and really doubling down on Michael Esposito Inc. and focusing a lot of attention there. But I had a big fear, and we were talking about this. I said, what I don't want Michael Esposito Inc. to turn into is something that I get tired of doing because I'm so passionate about public speaking and podcasting and doing all this. And I don't want to turn it into where it's like my job. So it's funny that you're bringing this up. And I read the E-Myth and I didn't even think about it that way of what you're saying right now of like turning your passion and being like, I'm going to turn this into a business, which is kind of like what I did with Michael Esposito Inc. And probably what my hesitation is on doing certain things there. So it's funny that you bring that up. It's very interesting.
Yeah. And I think that going into it consciously as you are to think about not, and I'm not sure where that harmony is the word you used earlier, where that harmony comes in, but it is a conscious, absolutely have to go into it consciously where you're not going to let this business take over you. If that makes sense.
That's exactly it. And that's what my fear was. And that's what I was telling her about was because I was like, I want to speak on stages. I want to be traveling and going and write a book. And I have all these ideas, not just ideas, but desires within me.
And you're implementing them already. So
that's exactly right. And so I'm like, but it's going to consume me, and I don't want to give up family, and I don't want to give up Denten, and I don't want to give up the things,
Right. So I think I congratulate you on everything that you're doing, and like I think you just have to be conscious of that and keep that in mind as you're going forward, and just not let it consume you.
Yeah, but it's like what you just said, but what we started with your 38 hours, it's like because you have that desire, because it's like from within, it's so hard, it's so what you are all about, that it can easily do that. It's just like what you just said about having to step away from the business where it sounds funny to say that it's hard not to go into the office, but when you're so emotionally invested and so passionate about something, it's not work anymore. And there's such truth to that, that it's not work anymore.
And I actually felt guilt for not going into that because I knew I had employees there working when I wasn't going into the office. And it was a massive sense of guilt, which also sounds weird. Like you're not going because like I wasn't enjoying it it took me several months to get to the point where I could learn to enjoy doing other things.
Right. You have this, and I kind of want to stay here for a second. I know it might go into Canauri, but you have this way with employees where you certainly respect them, which I hope all employers do, but you certainly respect them and have this way where you really bond with them, and this is very important to your values from what I've picked up from you. I'm interested in where that stems from. You mentioned it with your dad earlier on as well, in terms of seeing how he was with his employees at the shop, and I'm just interested in that your philosophy on working with a team.
Yeah, so it really stems from transparency. And so being transparent in not only how we're spending our time, but our financials and where the business is going and what's happening next. So that to me is the core of that philosophy is transparency. And it's something that I've strived for with differing levels of success through my career. But that I have an open door policy, which lots of people say that, and I'm work from home now since we started doing it before the pandemic, which was fortuitous for us. But we have a weekly all staff meeting, and as part of that, anyone can ask me anything. And if they're not comfortable asking it in front of everyone else, they can pull me aside offline and they would tell you I'll answer anything. And that's where and again, it's that transparency of we're all in this together. We're doing this together. And I certainly am not semi-retired now. I'm working harder, I feel like now, but I do have some balance and harmony in that. Because I'm so excited about the technology that we're delivering, and I got bored when I was semi-retired in my early 40s, and sold the last business, and like, okay, I've got the next thing to go do, and I've got additional things that I want to go do, and it's reinvigorated. And now that I feel like I have that capability to consciously not let the businesses consume me, then I'm much more comfortable in going and growing additional businesses.
Yeah, and yeah, we're certainly going to be talking about new technologies. I definitely want to get into AI, but I just want to go back to this employee thing. In that, so
Yep.
why is that so important to you to be transparent, to be there for them, to have that open door?
So, I mean, I think it's a motivation and a success of the company is
Mm,
really where I see that leading to. I think as an employee of a company, if you don't know the motivations of the ownership or the CEO or the board of directors, um, then why are you there? And why would you be willing to give up your life
mm,
to spend your time working for these people that you're making them wealthy?
mm.
Why would you do that?
Right.
And so that's what it all stems back to for me, because I wouldn't, I mean, I would, at this point, I would be a horrible employee. But if I were an employee, I would want that. Um, we went to an unlimited vacation policy about, I don't know if it's been 10 years. At least it was in the offsite backup business, and we carried it into the cybersecurity business. So it's has to have been close to 10 years. Um, be kind of before that was
Right.
cool.
I was thinking that.
And 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 really for me it was like, okay, I've been doing this for 15 years and working, I've worked hard. I semi-retired for a while, and then, working hard again. Um, but I take as much vacation as I want, and I have the flexibility to go do, if I need to go pick up my kids or go to a softball game or whatever. Um, I had that flexibility, and I thought, why wouldn't everyone naturally want this, but why couldn't we do this? And I mean, the thing that we struggle with is making sure that people take enough time off,
Hmm. Hmm.
and that they disconnect. Because a lot of times what happens now is people are like, oh, I'm going to take a week off, but I've got my laptop and I'll be working. Well, okay, but you need to disconnect, and you need to have some time to sharpen the saw.
I love that you said that, to sharpen the saw, because that's exactly what I was thinking about when you said that about disconnecting, and that goes to Stephen Covey's book, The Seven Habits, which is again sharpening the saw, so important. And what I love about what you're saying too about the way that you treat your employees is attaching them to their purpose, because every company has its own purpose, and you as the founder, you have your purpose for driving the company, but why are they working there? And they need to be attached to a purpose. And by you having the transparency, the open door policy, creating the flexibility, you create that purpose, and then which in turn, with this policy, this vacation policy, they then are so attached to the business that they actually don't abuse things like this. They actually use it properly, which is really great from an owner's perspective to see. I think it's really cool too when I meet with potential new hires and of course with my team, to see that they're so bought into the vision and so bought into why they're there, and I really really love that. I want to just go to the company that you ended up selling, which I believe did the disaster recovery. Is that accurate?
Correct.
Yep.
Yep. Yep.
And you actually had a very pivotal moment during Hurricane Sandy, and I'm just interested if you could share a little bit about that experience and what maybe led to the sale of the company and it going public.
Yeah, so a couple of things there. So what Axis Backup was an offsite disaster and offsite backup and disaster recovery company, and we were doing what today is very common, but back then wasn't even called the cloud.
Right.
But we were doing cloud backup and then recovery to the cloud, and it was a private data center that we built to be able to do this. But we would recover companies' systems so that they could run remotely, which back then was very novel. That's
Right.
just the way it is now. Um, But during Hurricane Sandy, we had 9 simultaneous recoveries that we did on the East Coast. For one that I specifically remember was an insurance agency in Manhattan that had 12 feet of water at their building's door.
Wow.
And so they couldn't even get to their building, let alone
Right.
work from there. So they actually went to upstate New York and worked remotely through our system for, from what I remember, it was about 3 weeks' time um, that they worked remotely. There was another company that was in Pennsylvania. They were a little over 90 miles from the coast, but such severe power outages
Mm.
that no power in their building, and it was going to be weeks before they had power. So they ran completely remotely off of our system. And again, this is back before remote work. Like, that wasn't even a word.
Right.
You just went to the office and worked.
Right.
So, um, so that was huge in the development of that company, and we leveraged that from the standpoint of marketing. We went to the East Coast and did several interviews and produced, essentially, they weren't commercials that you would have seen on TV, but put it on our website. And really, I think that those interviews that we did, that's what then ultimately led to our sale and our acquisition. So
Mm.
that was pivotal in that company. And then also around that same time, we started to see the rise of ransomware happening. So this in that 2012 timeframe is when we first saw the instances of ransomware happening. And fundamentally what ransomware is it locks all the files on your either individual computer or entire network, and then you have to have a password to unencrypt them, and they hold that password for the ransom. And so that's essentially what there's a little more complicated and
Yeah. Yeah.
complications to it than that, but that's essentially what ransomware is. And started seeing that happening back in 2012. And between 2012 and 2015, our offsite backup clients, 20% of that client base we had to do full on recoveries because of ransomware. And this is before you were even seeing ransomware in the news. And so that was the other piece that really made me start to look at how can we protect these businesses so that they don't have to go to their backup and to their disaster recovery to be able to keep the business going during a ransomware attack.
It's incredible. While you're telling me about all of this, it's just, again, you're seeing a need, and filling that need is again, you're finding something else, and you're going, wait a second, there's a big need here, which no wonder when you say it's kind of been easy and it's got to do with timing, but it's that old saying about success and opportunity, and how it's all about preparedness, is that you throughout have seen all of this stuff happening, and you were prepared, and you saw the opportunity, and you seized the moment through this quick decision making, which is pretty darn cool. And then so that's how you started now with where we are today with Canauri. And when we were in the somebody else called it the green room, and I was like, that's cool. I got a green room here at the Mike Esposito show. So while we were in the green room, I'm gonna start using that one. You were mentioning to me, I had asked you about the name and just the pronunciation and everything, and you were kind of sharing a story about the name. It's always so cool to hear a founder share how a name came about. Would you be willing to share a little bit about that with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So we started out as Watchpoint Data and started out as what's called an MSSP, so a managed security services practice. And we were utilizing off-the-shelf products to be able to minimize the risk of cyber attacks and ransomware specifically. And ultimately, we were still, even with best of the best tools and best practices, ransomware was still getting through.
Mm.
And so that's when we started developing our own tool, which is now Canauri, and launched that in 2021. as its own separate and our own software. So the name Canauri comes from what we use are canary, what are called canary files or bait files, and it's all part of deception technology. So you're putting bait out for the attackers to hit, and once that bait is hit, then you set the trap essentially. And so we didn't want to be the canary in the coal mine and be the dead little bird in the bottom of a mine. And so wanted something that had a powerful name, but tied to that idea of the canary. And so we came up with Canauri, which isn't a real bird, but sounds like a badass predatory bird
Yeah.
that goes and attacks these cyber attackers.
That was my favorite part. That's why I wanted you to bring up the name. Was when you said the
Yes.
badass bird, I was like, all right.
Sorry if that was a long-winded answer to get there.
Oh no, I love it. I love it. It's really cool to think of it that way. So tell us about Canauri and what you're doing with it today, because I know that you have big plans for this company as well now.
Yeah, so Canauri, what it is a deception technology company that we detect and stop ransomware that's actively running. So this is ransomware that's gotten past all of the other defenses and now is actively running on a network, actively encrypting files. And what we do is we recognize that ransomware running, detect and then stop and kill it in less than a second so that the damage is mitigated and that it doesn't spread throughout the rest of the network and encrypt all of the files. So the most recent ransomware that's out there will encrypt, these are some testing that was recently done, 222,000 files in 4 minutes.
Oh wow, so it
So
moves quick.
it moves really quick. And if you can't stop it in that less than a second, then exponential damage is being done
Mm.
every minute that it's running.
Yeah, and I know that you're like one of those. You bring in a crew and everything to be able to manage your companies. So I want to just move into the whole exiting of companies and what that looks like for you. And as you start working through these different things with your employees, is there any other tips that you could share in terms of exiting and what that might look like for a business owner who is building a company and exiting?
Yeah, so I think it's important to, again, to go back to the transparency and let employees know what's happening as a company transitions through. And any startup, and that's that other than the managed service business that's now going on 25 years that I plan to maintain and run forever as long as I possibly can. The idea of a startup is to start, build it, and ultimately exit and sell it. And so I think being transparent with the employees, letting them know that from the beginning, setting up stock option plans so that they have incentive and financial incentive on the exit. I think that those are all critical from an employee and an overall business standpoint.
Yeah, I love that because it's funny, again, just going back to Mara and my conversation with her, she's said that to me too, is, when I'm looking at investors and everything coming into the business, she goes, nobody's investing in a business that they don't have a 5-year plan exit strategy. So it certainly is critical to the whole thing. As we start concluding this, I'm always interested in, the forces behind someone like you who has built companies, who has founded companies, and, a lot of times they live by a mantra or something. And for you in our conversation, it has to do with FDR's Man in the Arena. And while it's a very long statement, paragraph, story, I know that you have it hanging on
It's on my wall behind me.
I was just going to say that. So we're not going to read the whole thing, but I would be interested in you sharing on what it means to you, and maybe if you could maybe just kind of like paraphrase a little bit of it for our audience.
Yeah, so what the man in the arena is
Sure. Yeah. And, while you're working through that cough, which we all appreciate the you muting it, I know Brene Brown talks about it too in her talk about the man in the arena. And what I love that she shared in her talk about it is that, unless you're that person in the arena that's there, that gladiator taking the hits, taking the punches, taking the bruises, it's like, then you're a spectator. And neither one is bad, but there's a choice between the two, and to have a really great respect for the people who do decide to step into the arena.
Yeah, sorry for that. I had a little coughing episode there.
Sure.
But yeah, it really is that being the man in the arena, to me, a man or woman in the arena, to me, means that you're willing to take the risk. You're willing to take the punches to see something through and to be successful. And if you're not willing to do that, then be a spectator, and that's okay. But if you're going to be in the arena, go all in.
Yeah. LeBron James is another one who I know has that in his locker, actually. He has the entire, probably the same quotation that you have behind you there. Just an amazing quote. I think anybody, I don't know it off the top of my head, but certainly go look it up. It's FDR's quote, "Man in the Arena," and what a wonderful mantra to live by and to carry forward. And anybody that walks into your office or obviously Zooms with you can see it right behind you there. I want to thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast. It's always incredible to have an experienced entrepreneur like yourself who's consistently building and selling and creating and managing companies and employees and all the rest. And then obviously also being in tune with reality of family life and like you said, attending softball games and enjoying life as a pilot, as a sailor, as so many other things. So really, really cool having you on today.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.
Yeah, it was great. Is there any handles, social media handles that people can find you on or that you would like them to know about? Of course, that'll all be in the show notes.
Yeah, so the best place to find me is on LinkedIn. So just search Greg Edwards and Canauri, which is Canauri. And definitely add the Canauri to the Greg Edwards, because there's more than one of us out there. That's the best way to find and connect with me.
Cool. Yeah, I certainly suggest everybody to go check out his LinkedIn page. I was there today. I visited you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for listening to the Michael Esposito Show. For show notes, video clips, and more episodes, go to michaelespositoinc.com/podcast. Thank you again to our sponsor, Den 10 Insurance Services, helping businesses get the right insurance for all their insurance needs. Visit den10.io to get a quote. That's DENTEN.io. And remember, when you buy an insurance policy from Den 10, you're giving back on a global scale. This episode was produced by Uncle Mike at the iHeart Studios in Poughkeepsie. Special thanks to Lara Rodrian for the opportunity and my team at Michael Esposito Inc.